The room was silent when she played the first note. It was not an ordinary silence. It was the kind of silence that happens when something breaks inside a person and she can no longer pretend she is fine. Isabel Carvalho was sitting on the piano bench with her hands trembling, not from the cold, but from something she could not name. It had been a very long day. A day that began with a phone call that changed everything. But that happened earlier. Much earlier. At 6 in the morning, Isabel was already awake. Not because she wanted to. Because she couldn't sleep. She worked as a cleaning assistant at the Crescente Music Institute, a music school for the most privileged people in the city. Its hallways gleamed with artificial light. Its rooms smelled of polished wood and old money. The students arrived with backpacks and instruments that cost more than Isabel earned in 3 full months of work. And she cleaned everything without anyone noticing her, as if she were simply part of the scenery of that place. It was an invisible life. In the morning, before the students arrived, she wiped down each piano in the institute. 5 pianos in total. The most important one was in Professor Adriano Castillo's recital room, a 53-year-old man who believed himself to be the greatest musical authority in the entire region. He was tall, always wore dark suits, and spoke in a tone that shifted between arrogance and pity. To him, music was a privilege that very few deserved. And he decided who deserved it. That day, Isabel arrived earlier than usual. It was Wednesday, and no one used the recital room at 7 in the morning. She went in with the buckets and the cloths, cleaned the counters, carefully swept the floor. And then she stopped. The Steinway piano had its lid open. Something inside her pulled. It was like an invisible thread tied to her chest that suddenly tightened. She put the buckets in the corner. Looked at the door. No one. Looked at the piano. And sat down. It wasn't a decision. It was inevitable. Her hands touched the keys as if they knew exactly what to do. And they did. Isabel learned piano at 5 years old, when her mother could still afford the lessons. She had real talent, the kind of talent that makes teachers stop in the middle of a sentence to listen more closely. But all of that ended when her mother got sick and the money disappeared along with the future she had always imagined having. She played for 3 minutes. 3 minutes that represented everything she had swallowed for years. Each note was a memory, a pain, a rage she had never shown to anyone. It was like opening a door that had been locked for a long time. And it was exactly at that moment that Adriano Castillo's walked into the room. He stopped at the door. Stood still for about 5 seconds, watching closely. Isabel didn't notice. Her eyes were closed, and when they opened it was too late. Castillo's crossed his arms. His expression was not one of surprise. It was one of contempt. "Girl," he said, and the word came like a stab, "you're the janitor, aren't you?" Isabel stopped. Her hands fell from the piano as if the instrument had burned her. "Yes, Professor." He took a step toward the piano. Looked her up and down, as if he were evaluating an object someone had left in the wrong place. "Play, black girl," he said, and a cold smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Make us laugh." What happened after that moment was not something Isabel forgot. She will never forget. Because it wasn't just a humiliation. It was the confirmation of something she had always feared, that it didn't matter who she was on the inside, the world only saw what was on the surface. Castillo's expelled her from the institute that very day. No official explanation, no conversation, nothing. She showed up to work the next day and her name was no longer on the staff list. She stood at the door for a long time, staring at that list as if she were reading her own end. But there is one thing Castillo's didn't know that day. One thing that absolutely no one knew. The composition Isabel played that morning was not invented at that moment. It was a piece she had known for years. A piece her mother had written decades earlier. And that piece, that melody that Castillo's heard and despised, was exactly the piece that someone had stolen in the past. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and put in the comments what you thought of the story and which city or country you are watching the video from. Isabel did not go home that day. She sat on a bench on the street for 2 hours, staring at nothing. The sun was low, staining the sky orange, and she felt nothing. It wasn't sadness. It was an emptiness she knew well, the kind of emptiness that appears when you've been hurt so many times before that the body learns not to react anymore. The institute was located in a good part of the city. The trees on the sidewalks were carefully trimmed, cars passed slowly, and people walked without hurry. Isabel lived 40 minutes away, in a small apartment with peeling walls and a damp smell she could never get rid of no matter how hard she tried. Her mother, Donna Cecilia, stayed lying down most of the day. Chronic illness, the doctors said. No cure, they said later. No hope, they said in the end. When Isabel got home, she didn't say anything about what had happened. She didn't say anything about Castillo's. She didn't say anything about the piano. She just sat in the kitchen, put water on to boil, and stared at the steam rising from the mug. That same day, on the other side of the city, Adriano Castillo's was sitting in his private office inside the institute. The room was too big for just one person. Books lined the walls, a thick rug covered the floor, 2 chairs that no one sat in except him. It was an environment built to intimidate anyone who entered, and it worked well. He was holding a glass of wine when his assistant came through the door. "Professor, the list of candidates for the May recital is ready." Castillo's didn't turn around. He kept looking out the window, his eyes lost somewhere. "How many are there?" 23. "Cut it to 10. The others don't deserve my time." The assistant left without questioning. No one questioned Castillo's. Not because they agreed with him, but because no one dared to step forward. Adriano Castillo's didn't start his life being cruel. That's important to understand. He was a talented musician in his youth, studied at great conservatories, played on important stages. But at a certain point in life, talent wasn't enough. He wasn't chosen for the positions he wanted. He wasn't the most recognized among his peers. And instead of accepting that, he decided to create a world where he was the one who decided everything. The institute was his creation. He didn't found it, but over the years he took more and more control until no one else had a voice there. It was his territory. His rules. His word was law. And within those rules, certain people simply didn't exist. 3 days after Isabel was expelled, she returned to the institute. Not to work. To pick up the few things she had left in the locker room. A cloth, an old bucket, a small photo she kept on the shelf. That was when she heard something that stopped her in the middle of the hallway. Voices. 2 people talking in the administration room, the door half open. She shouldn't have been listening, but she stayed. And she listened. It was Castillo's assistant, a man named Rue, talking to someone on the phone. Yes, he doesn't want any surprises. The May recital must be controlled exactly as he plans. No one gets in without his approval. A long pause. No, it's not a problem. The woman left. She won't come back. Isabel felt her stomach tighten. It wasn't because of the words he said about her. It was because of the tone. It was a tone of relief. As if she were a problem that had been solved without effort, without even being worth mentioning to anyone around him. She left the institute without making any noise. That night, lying in bed, Isabel kept thinking about everything. The piano, the notes she played, Castillo's face when he looked at her with that contempt. And she kept thinking about something her mother once said many years ago, when she could still sit on the couch and talk for hours without stopping. Donna Cecilia had a way of talking about music that was different from anything Isabel had ever heard in her life. For her, playing wasn't about being good. It was about telling the truth. Every note that came out of a piano carried something the musician couldn't hide, no matter how well they tried to pretend. Music doesn't lie, she said that day, looking at Isabel with a thoughtful expression that the girl didn't understand at the time. Now she understood. Castillo's could control who entered or didn't enter the institute. He could decide who played and who didn't. He could use his name and his power to close doors. But he couldn't control what Isabel knew. And she knew things he couldn't even imagine. The box was at the back of the closet, behind old blankets and a suitcase that hadn't been used in years. Isabel pulled it out with both hands and placed it on the living room floor. It was small, made of dark wood with edges rounded by time. It had no lock. Just a lid that closed with an old fitting that made a distinct sound when opened. She had known that sound since childhood. Inside was everything her mother had left for her. Everything that had been kept in silence for years. Not clothes. Not jewelry. Notebooks. Dozens of them, in different sizes, with yellowed pages and covers marked by years of touch. Each one was filled with musical notes written by hand, the firm strokes of someone who knew exactly what they were putting on paper. Isabel opened the first notebook slowly. It was like stepping inside her mother's mind. Donna Cecilia wasn't just someone who played piano. She composed. And not in an ordinary way. Her compositions were complex, with layers that only revealed themselves on the third or fourth listen. It was the kind of work a musician spends a lifetime trying to create and never manages to. Isabel sat on the floor for 4 hours. She didn't read everything. She didn't need to. She just needed to understand what she was looking at. And she understood. The piece she played at the Institute that day, the one Castillo's heard and despised, was there. Page 42 of the second notebook. Written in her mother's handwriting, with the date in the top corner, March, 8 years earlier. Decades before Isabel was born, her mother was already creating things that owed nothing to anyone. But that wasn't what made Isabel stop. What made her stop was a name. On the last page of the third notebook, written in smaller letters, like a note Donna Cecilia left for herself, there was a name followed by a date and a word, Adriano. 1991. Betrayal. Isabel stared at that word for a long time. Betrayal. It wasn't a word her mother used in any situation. Donna Cecilia was a gentle, patient woman who truly believed that music should connect people around it. Using that word meant that something very serious had happened between the two of them. Isabel closed the notebook and sat in the silence of the room for a while longer. The apartment was dark. She didn't turn on the light. The next day, she went to the city's public archive. It took 2 hours until she found what she wanted. Old newspaper articles, from a culture section that no longer existed. She searched for her mother's name. She searched for Castillo's. And she found them. The first article was from 1992. A short piece about a composition competition for beginner musicians in the region. Donna Cecilia Carvalho, winner. The photo was small and in black and white, but it was her younger, with a smile Isabel had never seen on her face. The second article was 3 months later. The headline read, "Award-winning composition accused of plagiarism." Isabel read the article twice. The accusation was made by a musician who identified himself as a consultant for the Institute. The name didn't appear in the article, but there was a reference to the professor who led the evaluation committee at that time. Castillo's. The third article was the last. It was a brief note, lost at the bottom of the page. It said that Donna Cecilia Carvalho withdrew her candidacy from the competition after the accusations. There was no further information. No defense from her. No follow-up at all. Isabel closed the newspaper and stood still. She remained sitting in the library for another hour, thinking. Not about her mother's past, but about the future. The May recital she had heard about in the Institute hallway hadn't happened yet. There was still time. But not to ask for apologies or ask for justice. Isabel wanted neither. What she wanted was for everyone to see. That same day when she got home, she opened the closet again and took all the notebooks out of the box. She placed them all on the kitchen table. She started organizing them, one by one, looking for the right piece. Not the one she played at the Institute. Another one. A composition that was at the bottom of the box, in the last notebook, without a title, without a date. Just the music there. Isabel read the notes slowly. Then faster. Then she closed her eyes and played in the air, her fingers moving over the empty space of the table as if the keys were there. It took 3 whole nights to memorize it. 3 nights without sleeping, without talking to anyone, without thinking about what could go wrong or what people would say if they knew. Just her and her mother's music, alone together in a small apartment in the dark, where no one saw her. But this time, she was going to change that. The night of the recital arrived faster than Isabel expected. The Institute was full. Fuller than she had ever seen in all the years she had worked there. People in fine clothes, strong perfume, faces she recognized from television. The recital hall glowed with a warm light that made everything look more beautiful than it really was. On the stage, 5 chairs in a row, 5 music stands with sheet music, and in the center, the same Steinway piano where she had played on the day that changed her life. Isabel entered through the back door. No one saw her arrive. She had no ticket, no name on the list, nothing that allowed her to be there. But she knew the Institute better than anyone in that room. She knew every hallway, every door, every dark corner. She knew because she had spent years cleaning all of it with her own hands, invisible. She stood in the corner of the room, behind the last chairs, where the light didn't quite reach. She stayed there for about 20 minutes, watching everything closely, as if she were confirming something inside herself. The first musicians played well. The audience applauded politely, that kind of applause that doesn't come from the heart but from habit. Castillo's was in the front row, legs crossed and a glass in his hand. From where she stood, she could see the side of his face. He looked relaxed, confident. Everything was going exactly as he had planned. That was when Rue, the assistant, panicked. Isabel saw it in his expression. He ran up to Castillo's and whispered something in his ear that made the professor straighten his posture for the first time that night. Castillo's didn't turn around, but he went rigid. The problem was simple: one of the musicians on the list hadn't shown up. And someone who wasn't on the list was trying to get in. That person was Isabel. She didn't go through the back door this time. She went through the main entrance. Walking slowly, with her mother's notebooks in her hands, entering through the middle of the room as if she had every right to be there. What happened next was the kind of thing you never forget for the rest of your life. Castillo's stood up. "This woman cannot be here," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. His voice wasn't angry. It was controlled, calculated. He wanted to seem reasonable in front of everyone present. The audience fell silent. Isabel didn't stop. She kept walking toward the stage, climbed the 3 steps slowly, placed the notebooks on the piano. "I have something that needs to be seen," she said. Her voice didn't tremble. It wasn't courage in the way people think. It was something different. It was the weight of carrying an injustice for so long that once you finally let it out, there's no going back. Castillo's told Rue to get security. But before they arrived, a woman in the second row stood up. Her name was Marina Souza, a music critic, the most well-known in the city. She wrote a column in the main newspaper and had participated in cultural committees for years. She had more authority in that environment than Castillo's, and everyone knew it. "Let her play," Marina said, turning her body toward the stage. Her voice wasn't a request. It was a statement. The atmosphere changed at that instant. It wasn't a movement, it wasn't a loud sound. It was a silence that weighed differently. The kind of silence that happens when an entire room realizes something important is about to happen. Castillo's stood still. His control wasn't as strong as it seemed. At that moment, with all the eyes in the room turned toward him, removing Isabel from the stage would mean looking cruel in front of everyone. And he knew the game better than anyone. He sat down. Isabel opened the notebook to the right place. The last composition. The one without a title. The one without a date. She sat on the piano bench and for a few seconds kept her fingers on the edge of the keys, without playing. The entire room waited. When she began to play, it was as if the air changed its consistency. The notes weren't loud. They started slowly, almost imperceptible, like a conversation between her and the piano. And little by little it grew. It wasn't technique. It was truth. It was a mother who created something that was never heard by the world. It was a daughter playing with everything her mother had not been allowed to show the world during her entire life. Isabel played for 4.5 minutes. When the last note fell into the silence of the room, no one applauded. Not immediately. There was a moment, 3 seconds maybe, when no one in the room moved or even breathed properly. And then Marina Souza was the first to stand up. Then one by one, the rest of the room followed. But Castillo's didn't move at all. Marina Souza did not leave that night. After the applause stopped, after people began to drift into the hallway talking among themselves with a different air, Marina walked up to the stage. She didn't rush. She didn't draw attention. She simply walked to where Isabel was sitting, still on the piano bench, her hands resting on her knees. "Are you Cecilia Carvalho's daughter?" Isabel looked at her. She didn't answer immediately. It was a question she didn't expect to receive that way, at that moment, from that person. "Yes." Marina stayed silent for a while. Then she sat in the nearest chair and looked at the notebooks still resting on the piano. "I knew her," she said. "Not well. But I knew her. And I know what happened to her." Isabel felt something shift inside her chest. It wasn't a shock. It was more like a knot that had been stuck for a long time and that someone had finally begun to untie. Marina didn't stay there just that night. She came back the next day. And the day after. In the 3 weeks that followed, she and Isabel met every day, sometimes at the public library, sometimes in the small apartment where Donna Cecilia spent most of her time lying down. It was Marina who asked to see the notebooks. All of them. It took 2 days to read everything. And when she finished, she didn't say anything for a while. She kept her eyes fixed on some point on the wall, as if she were reorganizing something in her head. "This isn't just music," she finally said. "This is a crime." It wasn't easy. No one was going to pretend it was. Marina knew the world of media and culture better than anyone Isabel had ever met. And she was honest about that from the beginning. "Castillo's has decades of reputation," she said. "There are people who will defend him without asking questions. It's going to take work." But Marina wasn't someone who stood still in the face of work. In less than a week, she published an article. It wasn't an ordinary article. It was the kind of text that changes the conversation. In it, she presented the complete timeline, Donna Cecilia's original composition, the plagiarism accusation in 1992, Castillo's role on the committee, and the mother's forced withdrawal from the competition. Along with the article, she attached photos of the notebook pages, the newspaper clippings Isabel found in the public archive, and an unnamed account that described the night of the recital. The reaction wasn't immediate. But it was constant. On the first day, few people read it. On the second, more. On the third, Castillo's name appeared in more than one place on the internet. By the fifth day, the Institute itself released an official statement saying it was conducting an internal investigation. Castillo's didn't speak to anyone during that entire period. Isabel learned later, through Marina, that he stayed locked in his office for almost 3 days. He didn't answer calls. He didn't receive visitors. When he finally came out, he went to a meeting with the Institute's committee, where he was confronted with everything Isabel and Marina had discovered. What happened in that meeting wasn't public immediately. But the result was. Adriano Castillo's was removed from the Institute. It wasn't a decision made on impulse. It was done carefully, with documents, with witnesses present, and with enough time that no doubt remained. He didn't protest. He didn't try to defend himself. He just walked out the door in the same dark suit he always wore, without looking back. Isabel wasn't present that day. She didn't need to be. What she needed happened 3 weeks later. Marina called her in the middle of the afternoon. "We have an invitation for you." The Crescente Music Institute, with its new interim director, sent an official request. Isabel Carvalho was invited to perform at the Institute's gala concert, as the main pianist. It wasn't a tribute or a gesture of pity. It was real recognition. The kind that shouldn't need to happen, but happened anyway. Isabel stayed silent when Marina read the invitation over the phone. Then she closed her eyes. She thought about her mother. About the wooden box at the back of the closet. About the notebooks with the firm handwriting of someone who created without anyone knowing. She thought about that night at the Steinway piano, alone in the middle of the empty room, when all the doors were still closed to her. And she thought that music, as her mother always said, never lied. She accepted the invitation that very night, without any hesitation. If you made it this far, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and put in the comments what you thought of the story and which city or country you are watching the video from.